Our first session at the tent today is how relevant is travel writing in the age of Google Maps? And for that, I invite Ms. Deepa Agarwal, Mr. Andrew Fernando, and Ms. Preeti onto the dais. Ms. Agarwal writes for both children and adults and has published over 50 books. An author, poet, and translator, her latest works are The Begum, The Teenage Diary of Noor Jahan, Friendship Stories, and Journey to the Forbidden City. We're very happy to have you here, ma'am. Mr. Andrew Fernando is not new to the stage. He was here yesterday too. His book, A Sleepless Isle, is an account of his travels through his homeland, Sri Lanka. Apart from being a writer and satirist, he is a Sri Lankan correspondent for ESPN Cricinfo for the Sri Lankan cricket team. Happy to have you here again, sir. The session will be moderated by Ms. Preeti, who was a winner in season 1 of Write India. Currently a yoga instructor, but her passion for writing takes us to the world of magic and entertainment. Happy to have you, Preeti, and over to you.
Right. A very warm welcome to future leaders to the Times Litfest 2020. I am Preeti, and let's get this session underway. Right. When I was little, there was a lot of traveling that we used to do in and out Bangalore. And invariably, we used to stop for directions. And this is what we used to get. Sir, straight agi hogi, left cut madi, right nim devasthana sikte. Of course, times have changed. This is the era of Google Maps. Karen Jacobson says, in 850 meters, take a left, then right, and you're at your destination. So how many of you here actually used Google Maps to get here, to the venue? There. So Google Maps, technology, it's all here to stay. Which brings us to our session. How relevant is travel writing in this era of technology and Google Maps? Let's begin. We have had an introduction to both our authors, so we will go right on to the session. Right. Deepa ma'am, she's very fond of traveling. She loves traveling. So when you're bitten by the travel bug, how do you decide where you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, you were telling me how, when you're bitten by the travel bug, how do you decide where do you want to go? Well, there are many factors, and I've been an avid reader all my life. And curiously enough, my travel bug is directed by the fiction writing that I have encountered through my life. And all the places, stories set in fascinating places. Like, for example, not too long back, I was reading a book set in Iceland, and another very famous novel set in North Korea. Now, North Korea is not a place I'd like to visit, but I definitely would like to go to Iceland. And apart from that, all my childhood reading, all the magical places that, I've created mind pictures of. And that is how, I have this bucket list, and I'm hoping that one by one, I will be able to visit all these places before I die.
Really nice. One more reason why writing actually is king, All right, this is for you, Mr. Fidel. Cricket writing seems to be diametrically opposite. What made the change from the cricket pitch to the writing board?
Yeah, so in my day job, I write about cricket a lot for ESPN Cricinfo, but it wasn't such a big change. I think the sports writing and the cricket writing I really enjoy has always said something about culture and people. Cricket is something that doesn't have a lot of inherent value, so it's just 11 men or women playing, chasing a ball around the field. There's no real reason why we should invest ourselves so much in that. And the fact that we do all over South Asia, especially, but in other parts of the world as well, says a lot about us and our culture. And I found that when I was writing about cricket, I was often writing about Sri Lanka. When I was writing about the people and the place. And so, I mean, that's a very, very easy, transition to being a travel writer, where that is what you write about, people and places. Yeah.
So I guess writers are just born that way, huh? They ultimately reach there. Right, ma'am. A little bit about your book. We heard that it's a real-life action adventure. So a little something to keep our interest piqued.
Okay, this is my latest book, Journey to the Forbidden City. Now, when I wrote this book, I really didn't think of it as a travel book. It was a family history for me, because the main protagonist, Nain Singh Rawat, was an uncle of my grandfather's. And I had heard about him from my childhood, growing up, how he explored Tibet in disguise. Because, at that time, foreigners were allowed very limited entry into Tibet. And Tibet was a blank on the world map. And the British were extremely curious about Tibet. There were all the legends about the fabulous gold fields and the flying llamas. So they were very curious, and they were also wanting to counter the Russian influence. Russia was creeping in from the west. So, but they couldn't enter Tibet. So what they did, a certain Colonel James Walker, came up with the idea that people living on the border areas of India and Tibet, who resembled Tibetans, could speak Tibetan, and were allowed to trade in particular areas of Tibet. He thought, why don't we train these people? And Nain Singh Rawat, he had done some exploration work earlier with some German explorers, and at that time, currently, he was working as a school teacher in his ancestral village of Milam, which is just on the Indo-Tibetan border. So he was one of the people, along with his cousin, picked up for training in the art of survey. Because at that time, these are all actually imperialistic designs. They had the great trigonometrical survey, which has, morphed into the survey of India, because maps are absolutely essential. We have Google Maps, but at that time, they had this big blank space. So they trained these men in the art of surveying, but it had to be done in absolute secrecy. So Nain Singh Rawat learned to measure distance by counting his footsteps. He kept count on a rosary made up of 100 beads instead of 108, and he hid his notes in the prayer wheel that he was carrying, because he was disguised as a lama. Sometimes he adopted other disguises, whatever the occasion, demanded. So you see, this was a journey not taken for pleasure or out of curiosity, because the hard fact was that Nain Singh Rawat was at that time deeply in debt. He needed a job, and he was doing it because it was a livelihood for him. But the thing is, because the book is based on his diaries, which are fascinating reading, but it seems like that he really got into the job with great passion, and he took a lot of risks. And he was also a very good talker, so he could talk himself out of tricky situations. And he was a stickler for his job. He pursued his job very thoroughly, and the end result was he was the first man to fix the location of Lhasa, and fairly accurately, considering his primitive instruments. Also the altitude, and he traced the course of the Brahmaputra and placed many rivers, lakes, mountains on the world map. And as I said, it was a very risky journey, and he made 4 such journeys. So this is what my book is about.
Really fascinating. You must be really proud to have achieved that dream of writing this book.
Oh, yeah, I've been reading, talking to people for years and years, more than 20 years. So I'm really happy that this book was finally published.
We are really happy to, actually. Mr. Fidel, 8 weeks journeying through Sri Lanka, quite a journey it must have been. What were the challenges, some of it, that you may have faced?
They're just general challenges that I think most people will face when you're traveling 8 weeks. You get a lot of fatigue. There was one point at which I kind of had an accident in a trishaw in Kandy. Went into a ditch and I had to get 5 stitches on my head. All of this kinds of stuff happens at one point. And also the wildlife in Sri Lanka is sometimes is in very close proximity with the towns and the villages there. So there was always a threat of elephants and wild elephants coming into view and maybe surprising you. So those were some challenges. Otherwise, I mean, it was mainly about fatigue, and there is a point at the book where I kind of got very sick of other travelers. Obviously you're spending so much time with people who are also traveling. That does set in, and you miss home a little bit. But the thing is that the joys of travel are so overwhelming, and you just have to push through this 3-4 hour period where maybe you're not having so much fun. And then all those things that you love about travel begin to reimpose themselves again, and you remember why you're here. And in some ways, I kind of wish it had been longer than 8 weeks, so I could have been to even more places.
Incredible. Wish we could all get a chance that way. Anyway, Mr. Fidel, this is again for you. When you were in a situation, or rather, when you're done exploring a place, how did you decide where you want to go next?
Yeah, so my journey was very much very ad hoc, not organized at all. I knew kind of which parts of the country I wanted to go to. I wanted to visit as many of them as possible, and there are lots of pockets of the country that aren't on the tourist track. So Sri Lanka's had a lot of travel writing since the end of the war. There's been a big tourism boom, but my compulsion to write the book came out of my not feeling that it was not a fair representation of the country so much. So I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to give a proper Sri Lankan take on Sri Lanka, bringing in history, bringing in not just the nation's history, but my family history as well, because we kind of come from quite a diverse group of people. And so it's there were certain parts of the country that I wanted to hit, but I would just wake up that morning and kind of let my journalistic instincts guide me, because if something was happening, if there was a story there to be explored and talked about, then I would go to that place. Thankfully, Sri Lanka is so small and so well connected via the bus system especially, that you can just wake up and decide where to go and then hop on a bus that day and then be there before the day's end. So I was very lucky to be able to do that.
Great. I think sometimes you just don't need a plan. It just happens by itself. Right. Okay. This is for the both of you. During your travels, did you try and gather information from some person who had already been there, wherever you were?
Well, yes, to some extent. Sometimes, friends will recommend this particular place and say, oh, you must go there. And definitely, I did talk to friends. But the fact is, everyone's experience is different. And the other thing is that places change. And I've experienced it myself, going for a second time to the same place after a lapse of years. It may not be the same at all. Yeah, so it's useful to get information from people whom you know and believe have similar tastes. But at the end of the day, it's your own adventure.
That's true. But Mr. Fidel, I don't think you had that novelty of asking someone most of the time. So how did you handle that?
Yeah, I didn't ask for many recommendations. I was more interested in going and finding out the stories of the people in the various parts of the country that I visited. So if I would, come to a new town or a village, and I'd go out and speak to the locals and find out what was going on at the time, either the guest house owner or the trishaw driver or anyone basically that I struck up a conversation with. So I didn't really take recommendations in that way. The travel wasn't necessarily just for enjoyment. It was about working out what was happening in various parts of the country and trying to tell those people's stories. And I made, I met so many people who were open and were able to, basically that were willing to talk about their lives and what was going on for them and their village or their town, and how it kind of tied up with what was going on in the rest of the country. Yeah, those were the conversations I had rather than sort of specific recommendations.
That really sounds good. Ma'am, this is for you. During your travels, or even maybe before it, did you use technology of any kind?
Well, of course, how can one not use technology at present times?
We are in that
Yeah.
kind of an age.
So definitely I checked out hotel modes of travel, did my bookings online, booked tours, and thought of itineraries for myself online. But the thing is, when you're booking something online, or even if you're reading a review, it's not the same as when you're actually there in the place, as I mentioned earlier. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have technology to help you, because earlier you were very much at sea, and of course it's wonderful as Fidel went along and discovering that that's a different kind of travel. But for an older person, I think this is more comfortable.
Yes, technology could be a game changer, actually. Right. Mr. Fidel, I'm sure while trekking through Sri Lanka, you came to places, or you have been to places where technology was not much used, like maybe zero connectivity, no internet. So how did you handle those situations? And did it really affect the absence of technology?
No, so I thankfully Sri Lanka is small enough that the areas where you don't have much connectivity, there are very few. You very rarely run into those kinds of zones. And generally, there's something else to do. When you're in a forest, you don't have to be on your phone all the time. It's nice to have that break from technology. I used it generally. I was very technology reliant during the trip. I was because I had no plan. I would book a hotel on the way. While I'm on the bus, I'd book. Sometimes towards the end of the trip, I'd completely forgotten that I hadn't booked a place, and I'd turn up at the bus stand and then find a place, and 10 minutes later I was checking in. So it does change the way we travel. It also kind of sometimes maybe takes something away from the human interaction. So previously you would ask for directions, or maybe you'd turn up to a town and you'd go looking for a guest house and you'd ask at 7 places, and there can be stories that can come out of that. But also, the convenience means you can also focus on other things and having other experiences. So you don't have to waste time, getting lost somewhere. But that said, getting lost is one of the most hardy tropes in travel writing. Every travel book has a story about getting lost, and I don't think I had one just because I had the technology in my hand, and I didn't get lost anywhere.
Of course, it's not comfortable when you're younger, but even older people. I have an older sister who likes, who used to trek a lot, and in trekking you can get lost in the hills also.
Right.
But she was able to, cope with that. And there are other aspects, not having a good bathroom or a comfortable bed to sleep. It's basically just because you're so keen to discover new places that you're willing to rough it out. But as of now, I'm always happy to take the help of technology.
Very well put. Mr. Fidel, when you were in your travels, how do you deal with something that you're not sure of? In the sense, how would you, in the absence of technology or in the absence of human interaction, when you have no other go, how do you go ahead?
I guess you just have no choice but to continue.
Just rough it out.
There was one time when I was riding through a forest. I was on a scooter, and it's in one of the most far-flung parts of the country, and it's reserved forests on either side. So there's elephants either side, and I was basically just constantly worried that all the tree trunks started to look like elephant legs. All the branches started to look like tusks, and I was incredibly nervous riding through. It was like a 14, 15 kilometer ride. But you have no choice. This was one of the parts of the country that didn't have any phone reception also. You just have no choice but to continue. You've got yourself into this situation, and you have to, make sure that you get out of it.
Like ma'am said, you just have to rough it out. Right, we are in the age of technology, no go about it. So, ma'am, Mr. Fidel, if it was a choice between technology and human experience, what would it be?
Technology and human experience.
As in, let me just be a little more clear. If you had to decide on something just because it seems like someone else had a good time, okay? You could say, would you rather read about it or would you like to look at it through the camera lens? Okay. This is the age of YouTube videos and vlogs. So
Well, frankly speaking, I'm not so much of a screen person. So I really would prefer to go via the book experience. And as I mentioned earlier, uh, been inspired to visit places just because I read about them, and mostly fiction, but also travel. I really enjoy certain travel writers. I mean, Paul Theroux is old hat now, but I just loved reading his books. I love reading, Pico Iyer's books, and so I feel, it's a personal experience that really connects you through that person's experience to a particular place. And of course, I agree that every experience is different. But then, what happens when you're reading an account, you can see the person becoming a part of the experience, becoming an actor in their own story. They're expressing their emotions, their reactions, their responses, and somewhere in the comments that writers make, you can see biases and prejudices, unconsciously expressed. So in that sense, you are also discovering a personality. You're not only discovering a place, but you're discovering a personality. And sometimes you wonder, what would my reaction be if I had to go to that place? So and so had this to say, but what would I say? So that's why I think it's more exciting to discover a place through, the written text.
Mr. Fidel, what about you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've also thought about what place travel writing has in the age of video. And what I'd say about travel writing is it's a completely immersive experience when it's done well. Video only engages two senses, your sight and your sound. You can buy the biggest screen, you can buy the best surround sound system. You'll never be able to taste, smell or touch, feel the temperature.
That's right.
Whereas travel writing really puts you in that boat in the middle of the Amazon with mosquitoes buzzing around your legs, or you can see the heat rising up off an open road and really feel like you've got like a full immersive experience. And that, I think, is where travel writing sets you apart. And also there's, I guess, an emotional connection that you can make with people in travelogues that you don't necessarily get with videos. And I'll sort of explain that a little bit. The kind of writing that I did, or the kind of research that I did for this book, I would meet everyone from kind of the wealthiest kind of Colombo elites to all the way down the kind of social economic sort of ladder. And not everyone would be happy to have a camera in their face and to give an interview to a camera, right? So when you're telling other people's stories, you want to tell it in the language that they would want to tell. You want to make them as comfortable telling those stories. If I had a camera crew with me and if we were doing a video shoot rather than just a sit-down chat with someone, the answers that you get are completely different. The storytelling maybe would not be as genuine. And ultimately, I just feel that it's such a richer experience because you also won't have the camera turned on all the time. Whereas when you're writing your experience, you can write about any experience that happens, whether it happens on a bus. And the best parts of travel books are always the unexpected, whether it's accidents or chance meetings. When the unexpected happens, I think that's when travel writing kind of excels. And so I think video has a place. It's a fantastic medium, and obviously, when done right, it can also be an incredibly fulfilling experience. But I don't think that it, it really measures up to travel writing. There's so much more richness.
That's very true. Right. Going on to our next question. We're going to be a little more general. Okay. But before that, I would like to ask the audience something. Have any of you read such an exemplary piece of travel writing that you just had to go to that place? Anyone here? Please, sir.
One book which attracted me was titled "What Then Must We Do"
Okay.
by Leo Tolstoy.
Okay.
So I wanted to see his house. I went Yasnaya Polina near Moscow all the way by my feet, not depending on anything.
Okay. Wish we could all find books that that would just send us to new destinations and new horizons.
Just like to make a remark. Curiously, there is another book I wrote many years earlier, fiction, based on the same research I did for this book. It was called Caravan to Tibet.
Okay.
And there's a place mentioned there, Munshari. And after that, I was pleasantly surprised. Two people said they actually went and visited Munshari, which is very far north. And so that way, books can really attract people
Yes.
to destinations.
Yeah, I think when you love to read, there's so many other horizons that open up to you. Right. Okay. Now, ma'am, Miss Deepa, this question is for you. If you were fighting for the writing world not to be vanquished by technology, how would you fight your case?
Not to have the writing world vanquished by technology with regard to travel writing in
Yes, with regard to travel writing,
writing
yes.
in particular. Well, I would draw upon all the wonderful travel experiences. Now, for example, the thing is, okay, we are living here today, but we enjoy reading, at least I've enjoyed reading a book like Sapiens, which, is the history of mankind. You will, Harari's Sapiens, a wonderful book about the evolution of mankind. So similarly, if you think about the explorers, if you think about all the people who went out and mapped unknown places, who took risks, and you can imagine how difficult traveling was at that time, how uncomfortable, but they were bitten by by wanderlust. So I really would like to share these stories again. And especially, when I wrote this book, I wrote it for children. Because as children, we were, people were going gaga over explorers like David Livingstone or Roald Amundsen. And we didn't know about the people, the Indian explorers. And then there had not been that many Indian explorers. So I think the fact that Google Maps is here or technology is here to help you, it doesn't obliterate the past, And we need to know what went before Google Maps. They're all the precursors of Google Maps, all the map makers who went before, and they faced great hardship so that now we are comfortable, isn't
That's
it?
right.
So that spirit, that unvanquished spirit of the earlier explorers, and just because they wanted to find out about what lay beyond, they were looking for new frontiers, basically. So that's what I feel we need to keep on discussing, talk about our own personal experiences, definitely, but also recall all the early writings, because the thing is, they have left accounts of social life in those times, And definitely Nansing Rawat too has recorded a lot about the customs, the food habits, even the crops, and funny little quirky things he's mentioned. Like one episode, he says, "Oh, the men in this particular area are extremely lazy. The women even have to wipe their noses for them." So I thought, that very interesting observation. Uh, so these are these little nuggets and tidbits, and of course the experience he found a gold miner finding a big nugget of gold and the excitement. So the past has to be preserved, and we are what the past has been, and the future, is connected always with the past.
Very well argued. Mr. Fidel, this is a general topic. In the world of travel writing until now, it has been mostly dominated by Western writers. How do you think writers from down south will actually vie for attention with these Western writers? How would they affect the trend?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably moving into a time when writers from the global south, just generally people from the global south are traveling much, much more than they used to 20, 30 years ago. And all the travel writing that I kind of grew up with was very Western, like the Bill Brysons, the Paul Theroux. And now we've got, I think there are some terrific travel writers in this country. Actually, speaking with a few other people yesterday, there's Srinath Peruz. If it's Monday, it must be Madurai. And just last year, Rajat Baikar came out with a book called Truck to India, which is also fantastic. I think people from the global south bring a different perspective to travel. And when you're writing about travel, you're not just writing about experiences. You are also a key part of the process in what gets projected to the reader. Essentially, you have all these experiences. You're the lens through which the reader views them in the end. What ends up on the page is very influenced by who you are and what your own perspectives and what you bring to it. So I think writers from the global south bring something very different than Western audience probably would. We probably write about other developing parts of the world differently than Western writers would. And I also think that we maybe elicit different responses from the people that we travel. So I'll explain what I mean by that. I was in South Africa last year, right? And I was doing some scuba diving in a little town, and the people in the guest house I was staying in, who were mostly Westerners, we wanted to have a little barbecue. So we went out, we bought the meat for the barbecue, but we wanted to have a few beers, and then the liquor shops had closed. However, there was a little bar open. It's called a Little Shebeen in South Africa. And I said, let's just go in there. The white people I was with, no, we can't go in there. It's not safe for us. And this was a bar sort of patronized by mostly black Africans. And I went in, and immediately the first question you get asked is, are you an Indian? I said, no, I'm not. I'm a Sri Lankan. And there's kind of a complicated relationship between black Africans and Indians in South Africa as well. But as soon as I said Sri Lankan, everyone kind of relaxed. They were like, well, what are you doing in our country? Welcome. Come and have a drink with us. I couldn't leave for 40 minutes. I was going in there just to get something out. So I think when you're from the global south, depending on where you are, you elicit different responses from the people as well. So if I had been a white person walking into that bar, it would have been very, very different. And all of that means that there's so many human experiences to do with travel that haven't been recorded or haven't been talked about yet, haven't been explored yet, because writers from the global south are just coming in to this genre. And I think that's quite exciting. That's you'll get hopefully maybe a new wave of travel writing. It's kind of had a lull this century. But thankfully, and Indian travel writers have very much been a part of it, there seems to be kind of a growing interest again, because brand new travel stories are being told, and also the world is changing so fast that what was written 25, 30 years ago is no longer true anymore.
I guess when you travel, you get to meet all the aspects of humankind, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. Right, ma'am, this is for you. How do you think our Indian authors fare against their Western counterparts? This is with respect to writing in general, not just travel writing.
Writing in general. Yeah. Well, I think we definitely are holding our own in the many different genres of writing. As they call like the empire striking back. But coming to the field of travel writing, I think we need more books. There are lots of blogs. There are wonderful pieces in magazines, etc., but not that many books. And written, I mean, I wouldn't like to, quantify something because maybe I haven't read all of those books, but of course I've read some very fascinating books recently. One is the Heat and Dust Project by Devapriya Roy and Sanjay Jha. I hope I'm getting his name right. And how they traveled through the country on 500 rupees a day, And that was a kind of an experiment they carried out. Then recently, there are a lot of books, more, I would say, adventure writing than travel writing as such. This is a Hindi book, Darra Darra Himalaya. And written by, interestingly, a neurologist who gave up his very thriving practice to take up a government job because he felt he would get more leave because he wanted to trek in the Himalayas. So all his perceptions of meeting the local people and, again, the adventures that he had, like Fidel, the problems that he faced and things, unexpected things happening. Then again, there is, I don't know if I would call it a travel book exactly, but it's Wild Himalaya by Stephen Alter. And it's also a book that grew out of travel. It's about all the different aspects of the Himalaya. And it's a beautifully written book. It's so evocative. And maybe I'm saying this because he also has a chapter on Nain Singh Rawat in it. But the many different parts of the Himalaya, whether it's from east to west, and so there is lots more left to be written, and I hope there are people in the audience who are going to take it up.
I certainly hope so. Okay, another question for the audience. How many of you think that us Indian writers have an edge over the Western counterparts, what with our rich heritage and our incredible imaginations? How many of you think that we have what it takes? Nobody? I thought everybody should be up with their hands. Anyway, right. All right. One last question for the both of you. This is, do you think that we as a human race are being completely digitalized, dehumanized? So how do you think writing, particularly travel writing, can bring us back on track as humans?
See, when you're staring at a screen, it's a kind of a one-way communication. It's not even a communication with yourself, I feel. And when you're writing, you are, as Fidel said earlier, it's an immersive experience.
That's right.
And you're thinking deeply, you're going over it in your head, you are thinking of the different aspects, and especially all the different things that you experience, whether it's food or, a place that you visit or the weather. So there's so many different things that you can bring into it, and the human element, the human connection that you will make with your readers.
Right. And you, Mr. Fidel?
I'm not sure that technology is the enemy to that extent. I think it can be harnessed to enhance, travel writing and to enhance a human experience. What I do see sometimes when you travel is that now your phone tells you so much that you don't really need to have interactions with other people apart from maybe you ordering a meal, and even that, in time to come, maybe waiters will become obsolete, and you do it on your phone, and you don't have to have that. But humans are social animals. I think we will. I don't think we're capable of living just this siloized, digital-only experience, digital-only life, and I think that people will seek out those experiences. I'm not sure, technology doesn't necessarily have to be viewed in such bleak terms, I think.
Okay, I'm going to be very blunt. Travelogue or YouTube videos, which is it that does it for you? Both of you.
Travelogue for me.
And you, Mr. Fidel?
Definitely. I watch a lot of YouTube videos as well, but there's nothing that compares with the travelogue.
Right, okay. With this, we'll conclude our sessions. I'd like to open the discussion out to the audience. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm very inspired by your last question. Are we humans? That
Yes.
word you used. Second, you also said, you asked her, is technology essential? That word. I will be not at all essential, but it is helpful. The title of the seminar itself, I will consider extremely relevant today. Extremely. Okay. Why I'm saying this is, will you believe, any three of you, that you can travel around the world without a penny in your pocket for 3 years? I did it. That human level was one of the greatest lessons I learned was Sri Lanka. 300 kilometers away from Colombo, a small village. So that name attracted me when I went to tourist literature. It was called Ravanaguda. So I went to the museum, asked the director, where is this place? He said, 300 kilometers, you take my car and drive out, go and find out. That is humanity, okay? I took the car, went, it took 7 hours. The whole night I spent in the village. The entire village was recognized. One 14-year-old girl got up and asked a question to me. Why are you Indians? She was asking me, why are you Indians telling lies, lies, lies to your children? I was shocked. I said, please tell me, why do you say to your children that there was a man called Ravana with 10 heads? 10 heads. Will any child in the world will believe it? I said to her, you are my teacher today. That factor to me is a great education. We in India, we have Jagat Gurus going around the world and telling so many things. So I'm critical about it, okay? When I did my travel, my question was, 20th century created the graveyard of human civilization. I wanted to see that graveyard, where it is, Hiroshima. So far. So I decided to go and see that place. But I have no money, no telephone, no all that. So I decided to walk. It took 3 years for me to reach there. But before that, I wanted to ask a question to 4 people in the world. Khrushchev in Moscow, Kennedy in Washington, de Gaulle in Paris, and Macmillan in London. I want to ask, why do you create and keep the nuclear weapons which destroy Hiroshima in 10 minutes, 1.5 lakhs of people? Why do you keep it? I wanted to ask the question. So it took 10 months for me to, from Delhi to Moscow, 10 months to reach. Not a penny in my pocket, because humanity took care of me everywhere. Khrushchev said, you take my plane and go to Kennedy, bring him, I will sign the agreement. I said, no, you do it. When I went to France, the president of France put me in prison, deported to England. Kennedy was killed by the time. That experience of me for 3.5 years, or 2 years and 10 months, taught me how to be a human being. One simple story in Iran, I'll take it up.
Okay.
In a small village, a young boy came after me on a bicycle. Sir, please come to my village. Why? We have a big treasury underneath in the village. Only the Indians know that. Where you can find out, please find it out for me. I said, I don't know anything like that. He compelled me, you must come, you must come. Then he says to me, you come, find the treasury, live in my house, marry my sister. Human factor. I said, I don't know anything. I walked around. He was so angry with me. This is the human factor that we can never forget. We cannot get it from Google or anywhere in the world. We have to do it ourselves. I'll just show you the book I wrote about it.
Oh, I was just going to suggest that actually.
The book name is Footprints on Friendly Roads. Every road in 30 countries I traveled, every road, every country was
Very incredible.
my host, without a penny in my pocket. You can do it. Young people should take adventure. Don't believe in many things what others say. You do it yourself. You'll succeed. Thank you.
Very nice.
And my latest book is this, technology. Technology in India. The other day I saw a 9-year-old boy went and stabbed his father and killed him. Just 2 months ago in Bangalore. You know why? The father said, Beta, don't use the cell phone all the time after coming from school. Study Later you can use it. The boy didn't like it, he killed. So I wrote a recent book, my Cell phone तूने क्या किया? Cell phone तूने क्या किया? But I don't have
Everyone
copy.
take a look at that.
I'll give you. I don't have a copy here. Even this book, I don't have copy. You know, Amazon. I heard Amazon printed and sold it in America for $75. I didn't get a penny from them. But I don't care about money. When I lived 3 years around the world, I found human beings are most important and they will take care of you. Fidel Castro, my great friend. I told you, son. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with questions?
My adventures are not as great as the gentleman here, and I'm sure it must have been harder to travel a few decades before. So many congratulations. Thank you for sharing your story. I quit my job last year to travel for 1 year on a sabbatical, and what I decided 1 year ago, my travels were completely the opposite of it. So my question to all of you is, has that happened with you where you might have planned something initially, but the end product was something completely different? And I'm reminded of something I was told by a gentleman I met on my flight to Moscow. I started my journey in Russia, doing the Trans-Siberian from Moscow to Vladivostok. He said that it's not you who's deciding the travel, choosing the travel, it's the travel that is choosing you. And I realized that when I got stuck in a landslide for 1 week, wanted to go to this place called Pokhara in Nepal, and I tried 3 times and I couldn't go to Pokhara. So they said, maybe Pokhara doesn't want to see you, so you'll have to maybe please the gods and come back again some other time. So just wanted to hear your experiences on that.
It's like what we say, we Indians say, you know, if you're going on a pilgrimage, bulawa aana chahiye. Personality wants you to come, you will not be able to go. So maybe that's what it is.
Right. So anyone else? Okay. We will close today's session with both our very interesting authors reading out a small excerpt from their respective books. So please pay attention. Thank you.
It's I'm speaking a little bit about my own family history through the book. This passage comes after I had the accident. I think I spoke about it earlier. I had to get 5 stitches in my head, also ruptured the eardrum. So I was sort of feeling very sorry for myself, lying in a guest house in the hill country in Sri Lanka. And I was reminded of my grandmother, and this section is about that. Okay. Maybe it was because I had felt so unwell that I thought of my Tamil grandmother when I awoke. At times in our childhood, she had been sort of a de facto nurse to my sisters and me. Whenever we fell sick, my mother would ferry us all to my grandmother's place in the belief that her seaside home was better suited to our recovery than our dusty one. Very quickly, however, these visits began to fill me with dread. This is because although doting, generous, and good-humored in most respects, my grandmother was also one of Earth's greatest hypochondriacs. She was a wonder to behold when she felt her grandchildren in peril. Armed even at the best of times with some ointment or herbal drink, our arrival would send her into an organizational frenzy. Blankets smelling of mothballs were withdrawn from the wardrobes, washcloths for the mopping of foreheads were neatly laid down on bedroom dressers, Catholic prayer books were dusted off, and her rosary was constantly fingered. Soon she would begin readying of her arsenal of medicines like a nation preparing for a protracted war. One by one, these would be visited upon us. The first mode of attack was usually something called eau de cologne. This came in a dimple glass bottle and was a clear, sweet-smelling liquid that she would rub through our scalps every few hours. Though no more than a low-end fragrance produced by the Johnson & Johnson company, eau de cologne had become the favored remedy of many South Asians of her era, and my grandmother's faith in it was total. In her imagination, it staved off fevers, fought colds, busted headaches, alleviated swelling, cleared the sinuses, and would have brought gravely wounded soldiers to perfect health had generals ever had the sense to aerially spray battlefields with the stuff. When the eau de cologne inevitably failed to cure us, we were brusquely told we must be struck down with an especially stubborn illness as punishment for our disobedience, and, before long, the traumatic steam inhalations would commence. For these she boiled up a few garden leaves in a large steel pot until the concoction had turned a bubbling grey-green. She then had us breathe its fumes, standing over the brew with bedsheets over our head, lest the precious healing vapors escape. I would always emerge from beneath the sheet feeling nauseated. If this were to progress to vomiting, my grandmother would declare it a clear sign that one inhalation had been inadequate, and I would be shuffled over to the stove and have a bed sheet thrown over my head again. On our diet, my grandmother was especially particular. At mealtimes, my sisters and I subsisted largely on kolakanda, a sort of cold soup which looked and tasted like blended grass. This was followed by a drink called kasaya, which I am certain receives a mention in the UN's Charter on Human Torture. My mother, bless her, tried on occasion to convince our grandmother to feed us some carbohydrates or protein. These appeals were rarely of use. My grandmother was queen in her own home, and any challenge to her medical regimen was met unfailingly with sharp invective. Throughout our stay, she would also ban bananas, pineapples, papaya, tamale, or cucumber because a longtime physician, Dr. Ratnasiri, had told her that these were cooling foods that weaken the immune system. In fact, during times of illness, Dr. Ratnasiri would be invoked almost as many times as Jesus, Mary, and the saints, which was saying a lot. It was only later in life that I learned the great doctor had actually died long before I was born, probably of the sniffles, going by the quality of advice he had furnished his patients with.
Thank you, Mr. Fidel. That was a very interesting account of a grandmother and her ordeals. Right. Next, we'll have Miss Deepa Agarwal reading from her book. This is Journey to the Forbidden City. Please go ahead, ma'am.
So thank you. So as I had mentioned earlier, Nansing encountered many dangerous and tricky situations. And this is just one of those incidents that I found quite interesting. And this, as I mentioned earlier, this book is based on his diaries. So I've taken it from the diary. And he had to walk because he had to count his footsteps, if you recall. But he reached a point when his legs were aching really badly. And this incident took place on the 2nd of January, 1866. So his legs were aching so badly that he was compelled to hire a horse. And he instructed his attendant, a Ladakhi called Chambil, to walk ahead and make notes wherever possible. They were passing by a large lake, the Palti, which had frozen at its edges. Nansing was lagging behind, intent on taking his bearings, when his eye fell on a clump of tents. I must mention, he tried to keep ahead or behind the caravan so he could take all his readings in secret without anyone observing him. So his eye fell on a clump of tents. Horses were grazing idly nearby, and large dogs snoozed in the sun. He gazed at them, wondering who the inhabitants could be. It was becoming a kind of a game for him to guess what part of Tibet the people they encountered on the road might be from, when his horse jerked to a halt. With an exclamation of annoyance, he turned. A large man with unkempt hair fanning around his head had taken hold of the reins of his horse. "Get down," he snarled, displaying broken yellow teeth. Nansing stared at him. Why, he began to ask when the man repeated, "Get down, I said, and hand over whatever you have." He tugged at the reins again, almost pulling them out of Nansing's grasp. The Pandit went numb. He had stumbled onto a robber's camp. Was it possible to make a run for it? Then he heard the mild clip-clop of measured hoofbeats behind him. A fellow traveler, a man named Muhammad Shah, an unlikely addition to the caravan. He had taken part in the 1857 revolt, India's first war of independence, and was making his way to Lhasa to escape the British. Even 9 years after the uprising, they were still hunting down the rebels. Muhammad Shah flung him a questioning frown. Not knowing the local language, he had not understood the threat the man with the crooked teeth had just made. "Why is this man holding your horse?" he asked. "He's a robber," Nansing replied through clenched teeth. Immediately, Muhammad Shah whipped out a revolver and pointed it at the man. "Leave before I shoot you. Get away," he yelled. The robber dropped the reins, pulled out a sword, and swung out at Muhammad Shah. This galvanized Nansing into action. He whipped his horse hard. It sprang forward. Muhammad Shah followed at breakneck speed. Behind them, a volley of shouts blasted, along with gunshots. Deep barks boomed out too. Men seemed to sprout up beside them like a rash of weeds, firing guns and egging their huge, shaggy dogs on. The dogs pursued them, yapping savagely at the horses' heels. But luckily, the horses maintained their pace and the robbers could not keep up. Soon they were shaken off. After a few minutes of vigorous riding, they caught up with the tail end of the caravan. "What's the matter?" a man called out. "Why are you racing like that?" "Robbers," Nansing gasped. "They're chasing us." "I think they've given up," Muhammad Shah said breathlessly, glancing back. He slowed down to a steady trot. That was a narrow escape. "100,000 thanks to you, friend." Nansing folded his hands. And to blessed Shakyamuni. He let out a deep breath. The word Devi Ma had almost risen to his tongue, and luckily he had realized it in time to bite off the familiar expression. You know, she's disguised as a Buddhist Tibetan. "You arrived like a lifesaver. We were lucky that we were mounted and the robbers' horses were unsaddled, so they could not pursue us." So I'll stop here. Thanks a lot for listening.
That was so enthralling. I was like reading over her shoulder. I'm sorry, ma'am. Anyway, we will close the session for now. Thank you so much. All you wonderful readers, have a fantastic day and happy reading.